Cheers to another coffee video log. So today's is about components and how I like components. I've been working with components since Flex. We'll maybe briefly cover that, but I want to talk about how we've lost something. That we've lost a few things, and that I think components are great and awesome, but we put too much trust in them. They sound like they solve too much, and why there's actually a problem with the Lego. So let me sip my coffee and compile my thoughts. Okay, so a lot of folks, I'll read these articles. I just read one yesterday. This is kind of why it's hot on my mind, is that it was like, oh, and this brand new model for building applications using components. And I'm just like, it's not new. We've been trying this for a long time. It's quite difficult, and I think the hardest part is drawing the line between what's a component and what isn't. And so that's part of the problem today that I want to talk about. But I just wanted to point out really quick that it's not new. Component architecture is not new. This has been tried for a long time. And if you thought that React brought the first life cycle, like official life cycle to a component, you're wrong. There's been many life cycles before that. Life cycles and components and managing state has been something many people have been trying to do across all these different platforms and all these different frameworks. My first one was Flex. So this was ActionScript 3. So this was a typed component that had an official lifecycle method set that you could tie into, that tied into Flash so that you could get hooks about its lifecycle. And it had this way to invalidate state. So basically nothing would cause a re-render unless you explicitly asked for one. It was like an optimization flag that you could flip. Among a few other things. It was kind of, there was even a style system, a component style system, so that you could extend and just sort of like pull in these one components and they'd restyle, and they have all these interesting paradigms there. So that was my first introduction, typed components, and I saw how far those could go. They were fun to build. Definitely learning about component life cycles was challenging and fun for my mind. It was really interesting that way. Okay, so here we are today, and at this point I've written components with different life cycles across various frameworks, from Angular to React to, I would even say, like Backbone had a life cycle, to Flex, and to anywhere I'm at today. There's basically, we're dealing with components that have these life cycles, which is great. So what's the problem? One of the problems is, like, we keep thinking about components like Legos, like they're this simple little thing for us to manage. That we can just pull one around and port around and it'll be fine, it'll plug in. And what we learn really quickly is that while a single Lego, like a leaf node, and so what I mean by leaf node is like the smallest little component that you'll have, those might move around quite nimbly because they don't have a whole lot attached to them. They don't have a whole lot of requirements. They might have a cool amount of functionality, but they might, they're pretty minimal in terms of like needs and stuff. Whereas you get to bigger, better components that do more, and they actually have like child components, or maybe they're even orchestrating components and trying to tie them together as like a controller. You start to feel where, like, is this a component still? I'm going to call it a component because that's what it is in my architecture, but is it a component? I feel like components eventually get to a point where they're an app. And so I want to talk really quickly about why leafs and Legos aren't very useful. It's like the same reason if you sit down and you dump out a bunch of Legos on the ground, do you feel empowered? Even if some of them are like big chunks and they're like molecules, right? Where various Legos have been assembled together into a new Lego for you to use. It's like, oh, cool, look, now I got like an engine made out of Legos. Okay, so now I can take that engine and put it into a car, but the car needs all these other things. And so what I'm getting at is that the Lego itself is not necessarily the value. And I think what we tend to think of right now in development is that is the value. Making the component, the Lego, once the Lego's in my folder and it's all set up and ready to be imported, we feel like it's done, but I don't think it is. I think the most important part is missing, which is all of its use cases and usages, and how does it interact with other components. Basically, what I'm getting at is Legos aren't nothing without good docs, without good instructions, without good rules that teach you the constraints of these things and why they're meaningful and how they can go together. Because otherwise, the Lego itself, I don't think is that worthwhile. So anyway, I want to branch into out of that thought of like, I don't actually find Legos to be that convenient. I play with Legos all day, so this is kind of where it comes from. I'm looking at a Lego and I'm like, you yourself are not that useful, even when you combine with other things. And you're only really useful in the way that I can break you and then reassemble you. That's one of your biggest benefits, and I can't tend to do that on a web project. Like, components get so tied together, and this is where we're going to move into the next section. Components get so directly tied together that they actually aren't that nimble anymore. They come with tons of baggage, and they're almost apps. They're little apps, right? I mean, by the time a component is doing anything really complex, it's a little app. So now what you have in this component architecture world is you have like apps talking to apps, running apps, creating apps, deleting apps, and we have all these little applications that we have to go look at. And I think that's where component architecture has been kind of helpful, like frameworks. Like React has given us a pretty good model for managing how all these things go together and how we're gonna, kind of tie it up. So I think that's where we're at these days, is like, I personally think we're overloading components. We had this mental model back in the day with like layouts and mixins, and I think the component is still pretty much just a client-side mixin. Layouts are being done by components right now, and I'm not sure I like that. I think that if you look back at Brad Frost, who said it's atoms, molecules, and pages, I think. Anyway, whatever, it eventually breaks down, which is kind of a bummer, but it's a fun way to think about it. So like components, I just wanted to like reiterate here, I think they're a fun, healthy way to get started thinking about things. But I think if you want to make everything a component, you end up like having some new problems. Okay, so components, they're pretty much apps now. Legos aren't always that useful. Here's another thing, is the word component is being completely overblown and doesn't mean very much anymore. It's so contextual and so difficult to put your thumb on what a component is. It's sort of becoming not a useful word to describe things. Does anyone remember the word widget? At least widget was honest about its vagueness. It was just like, I am a widget. And that it was just sort of fun that it was a word that we could use that way. But component is basically, to me, the new widget, in that you can say, hey, I'll give you a component, and I have no idea what I'm going to get. I don't know what I'm going to get. I could get something really small. I could get something really large. I could get a sticker in a sticker sheet. Anyway, so it's just kind of funny that the word component is sort of like so popular right now. It's losing some of its original intent, which is kind of hard. So anyway, component architecture, it's not new. Legos, I don't think are that useful by themselves. So you better have really good documentation that teaches people how these things all interact. We need to be careful about making them too big. We need to be careful about making components out of things that aren't components. Anyway, I'm thinking of like routers, like client-side routers that have like DOM representation. I'm like, sorry, if your framework is requiring that every component has a DOM node, I think that's kind of broken, because that's even short of showing you where your system is breaking down. Like, not everything has markup that needs to be in the document. There is functionality, there's business logic that is abstracted away from any markup. It's just functionality, it's just behavior, it's just events passing things on to somewhere else. So it's just kind of another like little interesting thing about components that I feel like we're all still struggling with. We have been struggling with this for 10 years or more. That's sort of another one of my points here. It's like a lot of people think component architecture is going to be the last thing they learn. And I hope it's not. And it's not that I hope it's not because I don't believe in it. It's just that I hope it's not because I don't think it's working for us perfectly right now, and I don't think we know everything yet. I think our industry is really young, and I think we should be open-minded to finding new solutions and just trying new things still. So components, I love you. I've made a million of you. I will keep making you, and I'll keep trying to keep you small, and I'll keep trying to not make my app like the entry point a component. I feel like that's just asking for issues. But these are my COVID vlog thoughts as I read an article that sort of, it's just components. I want you to work as good as everyone else does. But man, are they really hard, right? They're not easy. As easy as we think they are, they aren't. They're really hard. They're really hard. My last little point I want to get to here is that I think what we've done at this point in our industry is debated enough about the component lifecycle model. And I think what we need to get into is component orchestration. So let's just let people make components in whatever language framework they want to, but let's output to some single source, or not a single source, but a single type, just like Docker. So here's what I'm gonna get into. I'm gonna make a comparison to backend really quick. The Docker container, everyone agreed on, just bundle your app up into this way, and now we can orchestrate it and instantiate you and pass you data. It's like a standard. So if we just agree on a standard way to pass our components around, then what we can go do is debate about orchestration and data passing, which so that would be Istio is the way the data and IPs get routed around between your Docker containers, and Kubernetes is the way that you orchestrate those containers. So what we need is to sort of, if you want to like lean into this like heavy component architecture model where everything's like bundled into a unit, we should go look at the backend technology world who's doing a really good job about doing this in open source and follow some of their same patterns, quit bickering to each other about which component model is the best, and just move forward into the next phases. So those are my COVID blog video thoughts for today. In fact, today has been one of the hardest COVID days. So if I look cheerful, it's kind of I'm overcompensating. So anyway, I hope you all are safe and healthy and have a good rest of the day. Okay, bye. Thanks for listening.